This is episode 15 of Mob Truth, the story of Paul Castellano, the powerful Gambino boss who ruled with quiet dominance until betrayal came with bullets on a Manhattan sidewalk. Abuses he wasn't your typical street boss. Paul Castellano ruled the Gambino family like a businessman, suits, stakes, and silence. But when power turned into arrogance, the streets decided it was time for change. And they didn't ask, they acted. This is the rise and brutal fall of the last old-school Don. This is Mob Truth, where the stories are real and the silence is broken. Formerly known as Criminal Code. This is episode 15 of Mob Truth, the story of Paul Castellano. He wasn't a street enforcer. He wasn't a killer. He was the boss who tried to turn the Mafia into a corporation, until the streets voted with bullets. This is how a steakhouse became a battlefield, and the Gambino empire changed forever. The butcher's son. Paul Castellano was born in Brooklyn, 1915, the son of a humble butcher from Sicily. But even as a young man, Paul didn't want to chop meat. He wanted to chop deals. While others swung fists in the streets, Castellano studied power quietly, watching how the old dons moved. He dropped out of school in 8th grade, but not because he lacked ambition. He believed the real education was happening in the kitchens, shops, and backrooms of Bensonhurst. By the age of 19, he was already moving goods and information for the local mob into the Gambino circle. Paul's rise began when he married Nina, the sister of Carlo Gambino's wife. That made him family in every way. Carlo, the boss of bosses, saw potential in Paul, not just as muscle, but as a strategist. Paul stayed behind the scenes, using trucking, food distribution, and union control to build wealth, not bloodshed. In a world of tough guys, Castellano stood out, quiet, calculated, always in a suit. He preferred briefcases over brass knuckles, and that made him dangerous, in a different way. By the 1960s, Paul wasn't just earning, he was planning for power. Abbas, the commission move. When Carlo Gambino fell ill in the mid-1970s, everyone expected Aniello Della Croce, a street capo, to take over. But Carlo made a shocking choice. He picked Castellano. The commission approved it, and Paul Castellano became the new head of the Gambino family. It was a peaceful transition, on the surface. But inside the ranks, tension was building, especially among the old-school soldiers. To them, Paul wasn't one of them. He was corporate, cold, and too close to the white-collar world. That division would become deadly. A house on Todt Hill. Paul didn't live like a street boss. He built a mansion on Todt Hill, Staten Island, gated, guarded, and grand. Inside, he ran meetings like a CEO. No shouting, no chaos. But he also isolated himself, both physically and culturally, from the men on the street. He banned drug dealing, he enforced discipline, and he began favoring his own trusted circle of relatives and business-minded capos. Meanwhile, Della Croce's loyalists, like John Gotti, watched from the outside, waiting. Internal pressure. The divide inside the Gambino family grew. Gotti and his allies felt betrayed, passed over, disrespected, and leashed. Paul made it worse when he skipped Della Croce's funeral, a massive sign of disrespect in Cosa Nostra culture. Behind closed doors, Castellano talked like a boss, but on the streets, he was losing control of morale. The FBI was closing in with wiretaps, and indictments were building. Gotti believed Castellano would flip, or at the very least, bring the whole family down. A decision had to be made, a permanent one. House, December 16th, 1985. New York City, cold and tense. Paul Castellano, dressed sharp as ever, pulled up to Sparks Steakhouse with his driver. The hit heard around the world. The assassination of Castellano was no quiet job. It was a public execution in Midtown Manhattan. Tourists saw it, reporters caught it, and in Mafia history, it became one of the most brazen mob hits ever recorded. For the first time, the Gambino family made headlines, not for business, but for betrayal in the most dramatic fashion. Paul's body laid still on the pavement, his umbrella still clutched in one hand. No war followed. Why? Because most of the family already resented him, and Gotti knew he now held the streets. Gotti takes the throne. Within days, John Gotti began positioning himself as the new boss. He showed up at clubs, he greeted soldiers, he wore silk suits and smiled for the press, a different kind of Don. Old-timers hated it, but the young guys? They were inspired. For the first time since Carlo Gambino, the Gambino family had a leader who commanded both fear and admiration. But make no mistake, Gotti didn't just kill Castellano for power. He did it to restore street credibility and reclaim the throne from the boardroom. The FBI reaction. The feds were stunned by the daylight hit. They'd been preparing to indict Castellano. Now their star defendant was dead. Immediately, attention shifted to Gotti. Surveillance picked up whispers, tapes caught laughter, but no one was talking. The murder was clean and nobody flipped, not yet. The FBI knew something bigger was coming. They just didn't know. Gotti would become their next obsession. Castellano's legacy. Paul Castellano died without ever seeing a prison cell. He was indicted, surveilled, and deeply investigated, but never convicted. In many ways, his white-collar leadership style changed the mob. He brought unions, concrete companies, and food businesses into the family's income stream. But his disconnect from street-level soldiers made him vulnerable. Castellano's death wasn't just a hit, it was a shift, a signal that power in the mob still belonged to the streets, the Concrete Club. One of Castellano's biggest legacies was the Concrete Club, a scheme where the Gambinos and other families controlled construction in New York. From skyscrapers to highways, every inch of cement poured was taxed by the mob. Paul wasn't just collecting envelopes, he was dictating deals worth millions. But this also brought FBI heat. The commission trial of the mid-80s had Castellano in its sights. He never made it to court, but his empire did. The silence after the shot. After Castellano's murder, the mob world went quiet, not in fear, but in agreement. No one avenged him, no commission retaliation. Why? Because many saw Gotti's move as necessary and justified. Even those who hated Gotti respected the timing. Castellano had become a liability, too visible, too isolated, too exposed. The message was clear. If you forget the street doesn't forget you. Carlo's shadow. Castellano's rise was always tied to one man, Carlo Gambino. He didn't just choose Paul as boss, he trusted him with the future of the entire family. But Paul was never Carlo. Carlo was respected by all factions. Street guys, earners, killers. Paul only carried half that respect, and he knew it. He ran the family in Carlo's image, but without Carlo's instincts. And in the underworld, shadows can't hold thrones. Power over fear. Castellano ruled by structure, not by fear. He preferred to fire, isolate, or demote capos rather than whack them. To civilians, that made him look civil. To made men, it made him look soft. His lack of violence didn't inspire loyalty. It invited plots. And when loyalty turns to doubt, death is only a vote away. Gotti wasn't just rising. He was watching every weak move Castellano made. Both business above blood. Paul pushed the Gambinos into legitimate businesses, food importing, construction, unions, electronics. He was worth tens of millions, but this made soldiers question where the real money was going. They were risking their lives. While Castellano counted legal profits, he was becoming more corporate boss than street don, and that put him in conflict with the soul of the Mafia. The table divided. Under Castellano, the family split. There was the white-collar faction, close to Paul, educated, calculating. Then there was the blue-collar faction, loyal to Della Croce, rough and old school. That divide created confusion in the ranks, delays in decisions, and cold silences at meetings. When Della Croce died, that balance collapsed, and Paul made no effort to rebuild it. He didn't just lose soldiers, he lost the respect that protected him. Disshale by familiar hands. Castellano never imagined that his biggest threat came from his own family. He believed titles protected him, but in the Mafia, respect isn't inherited, it's earned and defended daily. The men who took him down weren't outsiders, they were insiders. They smiled at him, shook his hand, and then planned his murder. The betrayal wasn't just tactical, it was personal. Silence at the funeral. Castellano's funeral was quiet, cold, and mostly empty. Few bosses showed up. Few soldiers paid respects. There was no parade of limos, no ocean of flowers. Just a stone, a name, and a silence that spoke volumes. In the end, Paul Castellano died the way he ruled. Alone at the top, disconnected from the street, forgotten by the code. And in Cosa Nostra, that's the cruelest death of all.
The steakhouse setup.
The hit wasn't random. It was orchestrated like a military op. Gotti's crew scoped Sparks Steakhouse for days. They chose it not just for access, but for symbolism. Public, loud, unforgettable. The shooters wore trench coats and escaped through traffic like shadows. It was a statement. Castellano wasn't untouchable. He was target practice. The new era wouldn't whisper. It would shoot first and smile later. The Bellotti factor. Thomas Bellotti, Castellano's underboss, died beside him. Loyal to the end, Bellotti was feared on the street, but not respected at the top. Paul promoted him after Della Croce died, a move that insulted many senior capos. Some even joked, Castellano's dog had more experience. But Bellotti didn't flinch. He stood by Paul and died with him, loyal to the very last breath. In the mob, that's honor, even if it ends in blood. The public message. The assassination wasn't subtle, it was theatrical. Gotti wanted the world to know who was in charge now. Mob hits used to happen in basements or alleys. This one happened on the curb, under neon lights, at dinner time. It wasn't just a murder, it was marketing. And the message spread like wildfire. Gotti rules now. The commission's silence. After Castellano's murder, the commission did nothing. No sit-down, no retaliation. Why? Because the other bosses knew Paul had isolated himself. He broke traditions, he alienated allies, and most importantly, he got sloppy. The streets respected Gotti's boldness more than they feared Paul's status. The hit wasn't questioned, it was accepted. Castellano's real power. Behind the tailored suits and quiet tone, Paul was extremely powerful. He controlled billions in construction, unions, meat distribution, and more. He was called the Howard Hughes of the Mafia. But all that control came at a cost. He forgot the rule every capo knows. Power isn't what you hold, it's what others believe you deserve. And once they stopped believing, no mansion could protect him. Lessons from a fallen Don. Paul Castellano wasn't weak. He was smart, rich, and strategic. But he misread the street, ignored old customs, and trusted status over loyalty. He tried to modernize the mob, but in doing so he walked away from the code that made him. Castellano's downfall wasn't just a murder, it was a warning. To every Don who thinks the boardroom matters more than the street. The fallout. After the hit, New York's underworld held its breath. Would there be war? Would the commission retaliate? But the streets stayed quiet. Paul's allies faded. His businesses got absorbed. Gotti took the crown, not just by force, but by default. The FBI shifted focus. The rackets shifted hands. Castellano's era ended in gunfire and disappearance. No legacy, no retaliation, no justice. Just silence and shadows. That's the Mafia's way. Seize the Mafia changed forever. Castellano's murder didn't just kill a man, it killed an era. An era of quiet power, business suits, and backroom deals. What followed was louder, flashier, and far more exposed. John Gotti became the Teflon Don, a media icon. But with that fame came heat and eventually downfall. Paul Castellano died believing business would save him. But in Cosa Nostra, the street always collects. Paul Castellano ruled with silence, but died in noise. His story is a warning to every boss who forgets what built this world. Fear, respect, loyalty. Not mansions, not titles, not suits. This was episode 15 of Mob Truth, where the silence ends and the code is remembered. And don't forget to subscribe. If you're new here, welcome to the family. You're now a soldier in the Mob Truth crew.